Okay, so something obviously needs to be more to be said. I want to give a little bit more justice to Heidegger's fundamental concepts of metaphysics, and I did say that it was some of his early lectures, and I do think the early lectures are so much more readable, so much more accessible than Being in Time, and this is probably one that I would recommend the most in order to get at Heidegger's work. Now, if you look at the basic problems of phenomenology, which is, I guess, the sort of wrap up or the final part of what would have been Being in Time, right? Being in Time is done into divisions, and sort of the subsequent division would have been, if it all could be sequenced, it would be basic problems of phenomenology. And in there, Heidegger breaks out a tripart ontology. I guess you could also find this in his fundamental, or his, what is that? Yeah, I think it's the Metaphysical Foundations of Logic. In there, he'll say that there are extants, there are beings which live, and then humans as Dasein exist. And so he'll say that, tables and chairs don't exist. Now, when he says tables and chairs don't exist, he's not denying the being of tables and chairs, but he's trying to differentiate the kind of being from objects and artifacts, which are things, from life, which has biological growth, succession, and development, from humanity, which is historicity and language and awareness of death. Okay, rather than go to that, I think, as I was suggesting before, some of the more really accessible, readable parts of Heidegger could be found in the middle of this book. And what he's going to do here is elucidate those tripart distinctions of being in terms of zoological classifications. And his thesis here is that the stone is worldless, the animal is poor in world, and the human is world forming. And it's really quite fascinating what he does here. He looks at, what does it mean to speak of the stone, and what does it mean to speak of, for example, a lizard, which is there looking for the stone. And I thought I would give just a little bit of this. He says, the stone is worldless. The worldlessness of a being can now be defined as having no access to those beings as beings amongst which this particular being in its specific manner is. Having no access belongs to and characterizes the specific manner of being of the particular being in question. And he says, for having no access is precisely what makes its specific kind of being the realm of being of physical and material natures and the laws governing it. And then he starts to talk about the lizard which basks in the sun on the rock, right? He says, it is true that the rock on which the lizard lies is not given for the lizard as a rock, and as such we could inquire into its mineralogical constitution, for example. It is true that the sun in which it is basking is not given for the lizard as sun in such a way that it could ask questions of astrophysics about it and expect to find the answers. But it is not true to say that the lizard merely crops up as present at hand beside the rock amongst other things such as the sun, for example, in the way in which the stone lying nearby is simply present at hand amongst other things. Right? On the contrary, the lizard has its own relation to the rock, to the sun, and to a host of other things. One is tempted to suggest that what we identify as the rock and the sun are just lizard things for the lizard, so to speak. When we say that the lizard lying on the rock, we ought to cross out the word rock in order to indicate that whatever the lizard is lying on is certainly given in some way for the lizard, yet is not known to the lizard as a rock. If we cross out the word, we do not simply mean to imply something else in question is here or is taken as something else. Rather, we imply that whatever it is not accessible to it as a being. The blade of grass that the beetle crawls on, for example, is not a blade of grass at all. It is not something destined to become part of a bundle of hay which the peasant will feed his cows.
The blade of grass is simply a beetle path on which the beetle specifies, seeks beetle nourishment, and not just in any edible manner in general. Right? So he's really trying to give here some very specific examples of the difference between an extant, or we'll say a stone, is next to things, is in a relationship with them, but isn't a relationship of which it's aware of. It's just an extant. It has relations, but those relations they don't enter into experience. Now, the case of the animal is much more complex. The animal certainly does not only have the relationships that it has with its larger world as the stone does, but it bears some sort of awareness to those things. The question is, how are the things manifest to the organism? For Heidegger, they're not manifest as the things that we say they are. To speak of them is to release them, right? We use language. Language is part of the as structure. We can speak of something. I can speak of this as a paper clip, or as a tool, or as an object, or right now as an item of discourse that's helping to illustrate the as structure. The as structure of humanity, as given by language, somehow allows us to free things up from whatever they are in their concrete materiality, and we're open to experiencing things in terms of what they are in the human world, in terms of how they could be made available and relevant. And so this availability and relevance structure for humanity is categorically different. We're a world-forming organism. We're not a pour-in world in the way that Heidegger's sort of speaking about it. Now, when he says pour-in world, I think he's just suggesting that the relevancy structure, the ability to make items of the world available for and relevant to various projects, are highly they're pre-given, or they're precast by either the genetic endowment of the organism or the simple sensory apparatus that it has. To be human is to not only be in space and time and to have certain relations of materiality like a stone does. We not only have animality in the sense of being open to the world by various sensory capacities, but language itself transforms and overlays all of that. It reorganizes the capacities of the senses and allows anything that is seen or touched or heard to become available and relevant in terms of a plastic or an open relevancy structure. Okay, just the last thing I would want to say is, very seriously, if you want to get into Heidegger, so many people dismiss Heidegger because they try to tackle being in time. Being in Time is a very difficult work. It doesn't have near the examples that you would find in a book like this, which were lectures they were given to students, where you really see Heidegger giving great examples, illustrations, and tries to make this stuff a little bit more clear. Okay, thanks.